In the early morning light along the coast of Southeast Asia, the tide pulls gently away from the shore. What it reveals is not a beach, but a forest. Thousands of twisted roots rise from the mud like living pillars. Crabs crawl between them. Small fish dart through shallow pools trapped by the retreating tide. Above the waterline, birds call from tangled branches where leaves shimmer in the humid air. But just 15 years earlier this place looked completely different. There were no trees, no birds, no crabs. Only bare, eroding coastlines slowly dissolving into the sea. Storms struck harder each year. Fishing villages watched the ocean creep closer to their homes. Entire sections of shoreline vanished after powerful monsoon seasons. Salty water flooded rice fields. Fish populations collapsed. For decades, scientists believed this damage might be irreversible. Until one extraordinary idea began to take shape. An ambitious environmental restoration effort that would stretch across thousands of kilometers of Asian coastline. A plan to plant 50 million mangrove trees. At the time, many experts doubted it would work. Mangrove ecosystems are notoriously complex. Simply placing trees in mud rarely produces a functioning forest. In many earlier attempts, survival rates dropped below 20%. Yet researchers believed that if the right conditions were restored, mangroves might do something remarkable. They might rebuild an entire coastal ecosystem. But could millions of small trees truly transform entire shorelines? Could forests grown in saltwater protect villages from storms? And if successful, what would the coastline look like 15 years later? To understand the significance of this project, it is necessary to understand what mangroves actually are. Mangroves are not a single species of tree. They are a group of more than 70 specialized plant species capable of surviving in one of the most extreme environments on Earth, the intertidal zone. This is the narrow strip of land where ocean and land collide twice every day. Saltwater floods the soil. Oxygen levels in the mud drop close to zero. Waves constantly reshape the landscape. Most plants cannot survive here. Mangroves evolved extraordinary adaptations to overcome these conditions. Some species grow long stilt-like roots that rise above the waterline, stabilizing the tree in unstable sediment. Others develop vertical breathing roots called pneumatophores that protrude from the mud like thousands of small spikes, allowing oxygen to reach submerged root systems. Many mangroves even filter salt through their roots, or excrete it through specialized glands on their leaves. These remarkable adaptations allow mangrove forests to thrive where few other plants can survive. But their true power lies not just in their survival. It lies in the ecosystems they create. Mangrove forests are among the most biologically productive ecosystems on Earth. A single hectare of healthy mangrove forest can support hundreds of animal species. Their tangled roots form underwater nurseries where juvenile fish, shrimp, and crabs hide from predators. Studies show that nearly 75% of commercially important tropical fish species spend part of their life cycle within mangrove habitats. Birds nest in the canopy. Reptiles patrol the muddy channels. Even mammals such as monkeys, otters, and wild pigs often rely on these coastal forests. Mangroves also perform a powerful environmental service. They protect coastlines. When ocean waves move toward land, the dense root systems act like a natural barrier. Energy from waves and storm surges is absorbed and dispersed through the forest. Research suggests that just 100 meters of mangrove forest can reduce wave energy by as much as 66%. During major tropical storms, this protection can mean the difference between catastrophic flooding and manageable coastal impact. Mangroves also play a surprising role in climate regulation. They are among the most efficient carbon storage ecosystems on the planet. The thick sediments beneath mangrove forests trap enormous quantities of organic material. Over time, this carbon becomes locked deep within coastal soils. Scientists refer to this process as blue carbon. Some mangrove systems store up to 4 times more carbon per hectare than tropical rainforests. Yet despite their enormous ecological importance, mangroves have been disappearing at an alarming rate. Over the past century, nearly half of the world's mangrove forests have vanished. Across Asia, the losses have been particularly severe. Rapid coastal development cleared forests for shrimp farms and aquaculture ponds. Expanding cities replaced wetlands with concrete seawalls. Timber harvesting removed large sections of mangrove stands. In some regions, more than 70% of mangroves disappeared within just a few decades. The consequences were immediate. Without the protective barrier of mangrove roots, coastlines became dangerously exposed. Storm surges traveled farther inland. Erosion accelerated. Fisheries declined as vital breeding habitats vanished. Entire coastal ecosystems began to unravel. By the early 2000s, scientists and environmental planners realized that protecting remaining mangroves would not be enough. Some ecosystems had already collapsed. Restoration was becoming the only option. And that restoration would need to happen at an enormous scale. In response, several governments across Southeast and South Asia launched one of the most ambitious ecological restoration projects ever attempted. The plan focused on vulnerable coastlines in countries such as Indonesia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines. Together, these regions contain some of the largest tropical coastlines on Earth. But they are also among the most vulnerable to climate change. Rising sea levels, stronger cyclones, and rapid coastal erosion threaten millions of people living near the ocean. Restoring mangrove forests offered a possible solution. Beginning in the mid-2000s, conservation groups, local governments, and coastal communities began planting mangrove seedlings across thousands of kilometers of degraded shoreline. Satellite imagery helped scientists identify areas where mangroves had once thrived. Hydrologists studied tidal patterns to determine where seedlings would have the highest chance of survival. Local fishing communities became deeply involved in the effort, planting young trees during low tide when mudflats were exposed. Over the next several years, millions of seedlings were placed carefully into the sediment. The number continued to grow. 5 million, 10 million, 20 million. Eventually, more than 50 million mangrove trees were planted across multiple Asian coastlines. From above, the restoration sites looked like tiny green grids emerging slowly from the brown tidal flats. But planting trees was only the beginning. The true challenge would be survival. Mangrove seedlings face a harsh environment. Powerful waves can rip them from the mud before their roots take hold. Shifting sediments can bury young plants entirely. Salt concentrations fluctuate dramatically depending on rainfall and tidal flow. Many early restoration attempts around the world had failed for this reason. Trees were planted in the wrong locations. Natural water flow was disrupted. Seedlings died before forests could establish themselves. Because of this history, some scientists were skeptical about the massive Asian planting effort. They argued that simply planting trees could not recreate the complex ecological conditions required for a functioning mangrove ecosystem. Others worried that the project focused too heavily on planting numbers rather than long-term ecological health. Could millions of seedlings truly survive? And even if they did, would they become real forests? For the first few years, the answer remained uncertain. Some planting zones struggled. Entire rows of young trees disappeared after strong monsoon storms. In other areas, survival rates remained frustratingly low. Yet in several unexpected locations, something remarkable began to happen. At first, the change was subtle. A few surviving mangrove seedlings developed stronger root networks. Their roots trapped sediment carried by tides. Over time, the muddy shoreline began to stabilize. Sediment slowly accumulated around the base of the trees. This raised the elevation of the tidal flats by several centimeters. The deeper mud created new anchoring points for additional seedlings. Within just a few years, the young mangroves started forming small clusters. These clusters slowed incoming waves. And with each passing season, the coastline itself began to change. At first, the transformation remained almost invisible. From a distance, the newly planted coastlines still appeared fragile. Thin rows of young mangrove saplings swayed in the wind, their roots barely gripping the shifting mud. For many observers, the forest still seemed incomplete, an unfinished experiment facing the full force of the ocean. Yet beneath the surface, an ecological chain reaction had already begun. The earliest changes occurred in the sediment. Mangrove roots function like living sediment traps. Each root system forms a dense lattice capable of slowing tidal currents. As water flows through these tangled structures, suspended particles, sand, clay, and organic matter, settle to the seabed. Over time, this process gradually builds new land. Within 3 to 5 years of planting, researchers began measuring significant sediment accumulation in several restoration zones. In parts of the Mekong Delta in Vietnam, monitoring stations recorded sediment layers increasing by nearly 2 centimeters per year. While this may seem insignificant, over a decade it amounted to more than 20 centimeters of new coastal soil. That small change carried enormous implications. Rising elevation made the environment less hostile for additional mangrove seedlings. Oxygen levels in the soil improved slightly, allowing roots to grow deeper and stronger. Gradually, the scattered saplings began forming continuous mangrove stands. And where the forest grew thicker, something else began to return. Life. Small crustaceans were among the first pioneers. Mud crabs, fiddler crabs, and shrimp quickly colonized the sheltered root systems. These organisms feed on organic material trapped in mangrove sediments, and their burrowing behavior further aerates the soil. Soon afterward came fish. Juvenile fish species began appearing in tidal pools within the young forests. Studies conducted in Indonesian restoration sites found that fish density increased by nearly 200% within 7 years of mangrove regrowth. Many of these fish were species vital to local fisheries: snappers, groupers, milkfish. Their return signaled that the mangroves were functioning exactly as scientists had hoped. But the most dramatic changes unfolded above the waterline. Bird populations began to rise. Mangrove canopies provide ideal nesting sites for coastal birds, offering both protection and access to abundant food sources. Within a decade, surveys along several restored coastlines recorded the return of dozens of bird species that had disappeared years earlier. Herons perched quietly among the branches. Kingfishers darted between tidal channels. Migratory shorebirds once again stopped along the coastline during seasonal migrations. In parts of Thailand, biodiversity assessments documented over 150 bird species utilizing restored mangrove habitats. And with birds came predators. Monitor lizards began patrolling muddy channels in search of crabs and fish. Otters returned to certain coastal wetlands, following the recovering fish populations. Even macaque monkeys were observed moving through mangrove canopies in areas where the forests had grown dense enough to support larger wildlife. What began as scattered seedlings had evolved into a fully functioning ecosystem. But perhaps the most significant transformation occurred during storm season. Coastal Asia regularly experiences powerful tropical cyclones capable of generating devastating storm surges. For decades, many coastal communities had faced these storms without natural protection. The restored mangrove forests would soon face their first true test. In 2013, a powerful cyclone struck sections of Southeast Asia where mangrove restoration projects had been underway for nearly a decade. Researchers carefully monitored the storm's impact on several coastal regions. What they discovered was remarkable. Villages protected by restored mangrove forests experienced dramatically reduced damage compared to nearby areas without mangroves. Wave energy measurements showed that storm surge intensity dropped significantly after passing through mangrove stands. In some locations, wave height was reduced by nearly 50% before reaching the shoreline. Homes behind the forests suffered less flooding. Agricultural fields remained intact. Coastal erosion slowed dramatically. In Bangladesh, where mangrove restoration was combined with existing forest conservation efforts, researchers estimated that mangrove barriers helped shield nearly 3 million people from severe cyclone impacts during the following decade. The forests were doing exactly what nature had designed them to do. They were protecting the coastline. Yet their influence extended even further. As mangrove forests matured, scientists began measuring another crucial environmental benefit: carbon storage. Mangrove ecosystems are extraordinarily efficient at capturing atmospheric carbon dioxide. Through photosynthesis, mangrove trees convert carbon into organic matter, storing it in their trunks, roots, and surrounding sediments. But unlike most forests, mangroves trap carbon not just in vegetation, but deep within coastal soils. Over centuries, layers of organic material accumulate beneath mangrove forests, locking away carbon that might otherwise return to the atmosphere. Research conducted 15 years after the Asian restoration projects began revealed that newly planted mangrove forests were capturing substantial quantities of carbon. In some regions, restored mangrove systems stored between 6 and 8 tons of carbon per hectare each year. Across the full restoration area, scientists estimated that the 50 million planted trees were collectively capturing hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon annually. This made the project not only a coastal